A leak discovered years ago at the largest nuclear waste facility in the nation has expanded. Built as part of the Manhattan Project in 1943, Washington State's Hanford site houses 53 million gallons of toxic radioactive material. The once secret site is where plutonium was produced for use in the world's first nuclear weapon. The Fat Man bomb, which detonated over Nagasaki in 1945, set the stage for the future of warfare. Now, 73 years later, experts say it's time for every American to worry. Joining me now live from Los Angeles is RT correspondent Brigida Santos. Brigida, this leak first began years ago, but it has now expanded. How bad is this?
That's right, Anya. This leak was first reported back in October of 2011 when an employee that worked at the site, Mike Geffer, came across a double-shelled tank that was leaking, and this tank is AY-102. Now, I'll give you a little bit of background to put this all in context. When the Hanford site was first built in the 1940s, they began building underground storage tanks, and that went on from the 1940s to the 1970s. 149 of these were single-shelled tanks. Now, in 2011, when he reported that they were leaking, he was ignored by the Washington River Protection Solution, which is the contracting company. Now, to keep in mind, this is a site that has produced enough plutonium to create 60,000 nuclear weapons. So this is a lot of nuclear material. And at that time, they began moving, in the early 2000s, they began moving the nuclear material from these single-shelled tanks into double-shelled tanks. So they moved it into 28 different tanks, and AY-102 is the first of these double-shelled tanks to actually show signs of leaking. And they began pumping it this year, March 3rd, which is when the site actually agreed to begin doing so. And they were about 95% of the way through that process when alarm bells sounded early this week on Monday, alerting people that the leak had indeed spread. Now, to be clear, this is just the inner case of a double-shelled tank, so it has not yet penetrated that outer layer. But this is problematic because that outer shell is not necessarily built to withstand and hold this nuclear material. So if it does penetrate outside of that, then they're looking at an even bigger problem. And the Department of Energy has tried to say that this isn't a big deal because of that scenario. However, they have found 12 of these 28 tanks to have similar defects in them. And they don't have a comprehensive backup plan. There's nowhere to put this material if that happens and other tanks begin leaking. And cleanup efforts here began in the late 1980s when they actually closed down their last nuclear reactor. And they're nowhere near being finished with those cleanup efforts. So if they can't handle the cleanup prior to a leak, there's no way that they can handle this. And that's where experts are warning people that it's time to start worrying.
So why is it then that experts are saying now is the time to worry?
So experts are saying that every American needs to worry, not particularly because people in North Dakota are going to be feeling what's happening here in Washington, but because this is a symptom of a greater problem, which is something that you've been covering all day and that we have covered multiple times, and that's the issue of our crumbling infrastructure and how our government doesn't seem to be equipped to handle these things. And every time this happens, we've seen Flint, we've seen BP, we've seen here in Porter Ranch in Los Angeles, different problems that are affecting public health and also the environment, Anya.
Definitely a trend of a weak infrastructure and some serious consequences if something goes wrong at a nuclear facility. So thank you so much, RT correspondent Brigida Santos, for sharing that story with us.